Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen, dear students. If you recall, last session, we had been developing a concept of competitive advantage. And we had very significantly suggested at that point of time that securing and sustaining the competitive advantage is the core of a business or competitive strategy. Now, I don't want to go back into trying to explain the logic of competitive strategy or business strategy, but we should recall that it is through these competitive or business strategies that firms tend to compete in the market. And we had also suggested that competitive advantage alone is not sufficient, but it has to have its relative frame by which we say that a firm must sustain its competitive advantage. Now, we had also mentioned there, while we were discussing that there are a number of sources of competitive advantage located within the organization, and we had said we need to distinguish between two very significant points. One, what is the competitive advantage? Number two, and what is the source of competitive advantage? And while we were discussing that, we had decided that in the firm there are a number of points which can be considered as sources of competitive advantage, and we need to leverage those and fit them with the market requirements. And that fit we had mentioned as the strategic fit. Now, we have discussed these, and today we will take on this issue of competitive advantage and its sources in more detail. The reason was that I had suggested to you that the idea of source ambiguity in the competitive advantage theory is a critical point. Source ambiguity actually tends to explain to us that most of the time we are not very clear as to where is the source of competitive advantage located in the firm. Now, having said that, what we need to recognize is that there are a number of sources which are sitting in the organization, but it's such a vast topic. And the source of the source ambiguity of this competitive advantage forces us to try and keep this discussion restricted on 3 or 4 important topics, which will help us to understand the location or understand how we can locate these competitive advantage rather than trying to confuse ourselves. Now, to be able to do that, what we will do is that we will discuss these in 4 distinct points. The first and the most significant is what we call the resource-based theory of the firm. Resource-based theory of the firm, I'll discuss in detail, and then link it up with the concept of the value chain analysis. And value chain is an important point that Michael Porter was the person who actually articulated it in a very detailed manner in his books. Bringing these two things together, we should be able to understand how the resource-based can operate and what will be the format of that resource-based in action while we are trying to locate the competitive advantage within the company. Following that, we will look at 2 more concepts. One is called the market orientation concept, which is basically how companies orientate themselves, and with the help of that orientation, they should be able to do 2 things. They will be able to, number one, try and organize their internal resources and fit it with the external factors. For that, we have a major concept which was developed around 1990, and I'll discuss that in detail. Finally, we will come to the point where we will also look at the concept of generic strategies. Again, the major author of these generic strategies concept as the source of competitive advantage is again Michael Porter. However, there are other areas also which require our due attention. Now, generic strategies is a very limited and a very restrictive concept again. But then there are other areas such as the strategic orientations or orientations concept, which brings a new dimension in terms of how companies can achieve this competitive advantage. So we will have these 4 frames moving in. The first is to locate the resources, which will take us into the logic of where can we find them, and then we will have a format or a model to be able to do that through the value chain. Third, we will look at the theory of market orientation, which tries to explain to us how like I told you the last time, the market boundary spanning activities can be taken into position, looking at the company's internal factors and then looking into the external factors and trying to see where these two things can fit. And the way we fit these two things, we had already mentioned, are either through the strategies that we bring into position, and which are basically generic, which are Michael Porter's articulation of the way strategies can be the source of competitive advantage. Or on the other side, we have another area of discussion, which is basically orientations. Now again, orientations is the way a firm tries to locate and link its internal factors with the external factors, which is what we also can call in the broad term is adaptability of the firm with the external factors. Keeping these things in mind, we will now take up the basic issue of the resources of the firm, which is the resource-based view. Now, we can trace resource-based view back into history of economics. If you recall, in economics, the sources of the firm that there are, or what we call the factors of production, in the traditional literature of economics was basically land, labor, and capital. Later on, information factor of production as information was also included into that. However, that was a very static kind of framework. Somewhere in 1930s, Penrose, an economist, a very popular economist, tried to explain how firms are different in their performance behaviors, which means that why do different firms behave or perform differently? And she tried to bring a concept of sources or resources within the firm. Now, she had broadened the concept of the factors of production into the resources that firm adds or has, and she tried to explain that all firms own different kind of resources, and these resources, when utilized in different formats, result in firm's performance or firm's comparative performance. Now, subsequent to this, there was a gap in which nothing really was discussed, because at that point of time, if you recall my historical perspective, marketing was taking up a very strong position. Everything was concentrated around promotion and so on and so forth. But when the market environment changed and competition became strong, people started wondering what could be the reason for one firm being better in performance than another firm. And obviously the performance was comparative and was in relation to the customers of the market. During 1980s, both Michael Porter and a group of other people had started asking these questions of why performance differs between companies. I'll discuss Michael Porter subsequently. Like I said, I will when we will be looking at the value chain, as well as looking at the generic strategy concept that he provided. But during 1980s, two major authors, Werner Felt and Barney, they came about and they tried to improve the logic given by Penrose, and then they started bringing in the concept of strategic resources of the firm. What they meant to say was that all sources, all resources that a firm owns are not strategic in nature. Now here is where I'll draw your attention to the logic that I'd given. What is strategic? And I'd suggested to you at that point of time that strategic has basically three characteristics. One, it has long-term implications for the firm. Number two, it requires substantial investments. And third, I had suggested that these investments become irreversible in the long term or in the short term, because they are supposed to be long term. Your investments are into it in long-term frameworks. Therefore, in the short run, you cannot withdraw the resources or the funds or whatever you have allocated into that. And we have to be able to distinguish between these words. When I talk about resources, I'm talking about the resources of the competitive advantage or the strategic strengths that a company has. When we talk about the sources which are invested, we are normally talking about the capital and the abilities and the time and money spent in developing those resources. So we need to distinguish between the two. Having said that, we go back, and Werner Feld and Barney separately actually tried to distinguish between the two concepts. They said firms do own, like Penrose said, that firms own different kind of sources which are individual and unique to the company, but they added another factor. They said all sources or all resources are not strategic in nature. By this, they were implying that all these resources cannot be applied in the market to create competitive advantages. How did they do that? And a good example is that let's say there are two companies. Now, both these companies acquire computers, the latest technology. Let's say Apple computers, or let's say they buy any other Sony computers or Dell computers, but both have the same kind. Now, both have sources, but these sources are what I told you, that they are parity level. Therefore, they cannot individually on their own create competitive advantage. However, if both the firms developed softwares, proprietary softwares for a particular application, let's say they were trying to apply these proprietary software in the area of supply chain management, and these are unique to these two firms, but one software is more effectively used by a company than the other. If that happens, the company which is utilizing this proprietary software definitely now has a competitive advantage in the market. And whatever the competitive advantage, this advantage results from the application of the software, and not by the computers, which are both the same in both the systems, and maybe even to the point that both use the same software, let's say ERP software or SAP. Now, these are softwares which are available, and any company can use it, but the question is, who uses it better? Now, when we move into this logic, that who uses it better, then the concept shifts a little. Concept now shifts from purely a resource in the company, but now shifts towards the capability of using that resource. So, in other words, what we are talking about in terms of how and where can we locate our competitive advantage, therefore, the logic moves in that the resource has to be strategic, and the firm must have the ability, or if I put it to you, the capability to utilize that resource or leverage that resource for a particular end or particular goal of the company. Now, once we are very clear that the strategic resource is distinct from the resources that the company has, we also have now incorporated the ability framework. Now, this capability framework has got its own logic behind it, because now it tries to suggest that competitive advantage does not only lie with this resource that we have, but in the ability of the company to be able to leverage it and utilize it in the most effective manner. Now, we know that the capability frame is a little bit more complex. Here, Day is the one who has actually voiced this logic of distinctive capabilities or the framework of capabilities. Now, in saying this, he is actually saying that it's a complex system of activities. For a simple example, let's take a very simple example. McDonald's is a very successful burger selling fast food restaurant. Now, all the companies around the world know what they are doing. They know what kind of production systems they have. They know the machineries they use. They know the size of the bun that they have. They know the size of the meat loaf that they use. They also know the various ingredients but they put into position. However, the way the company operates at the back end of the final product, which is located in the front, we can see or assume that there will be a number of activities taking place, and all these activities individually and collectively must be merging to provide that end product in the shape of very fast food that can be provided and people can enjoy that kind of food. The complexity of activities is actually what Dave was mentioning in terms of distinctive capability. And these capabilities, you should be aware, are configurations of various activities. Therefore, the concept of source ambiguity becomes better and clearer, क्योंकि अभी हमें समझ ये आ रही है कि एक रिसोर्स जो है उसके पीछे बहुत सी एक्टिविटीज परफॉर्म करनी पड़ती हैं जिसकी वजह से we are capable of leveraging that. If we are not capable of doing all these things, it becomes very difficult to achieve a standard or a level. And that is why we see that even when two companies behaving more or less similarly in the market are still performing differently, the logic behind that is that each firm is approaching that resource that they have with different capability frameworks or different capability configurations. When these capabilities continue to be different and continue to exploit the logic of the resources in different manners, a firm can be said to achieve sustainable competitive advantage, particularly like we said that this advantage that they are creating is acceptable to the market, because finally it is the market which decides whether there was value that was created with all those activities that were performed. We can have a number of examples of these, and there are a number of examples practically available, but two I will quote here. One is Southwest Airlines. Now, Southwest Airlines is a very cheap, low-fare airline which tends to provide no-frill flying experience, which means that they do not have any seating available, they do not provide any food. Their traveling time or traveling points are within a certain radius. They do not travel international. They only service within America. And that company has been successful for whatever time that we have known that company to exist. When there was a lot of downturn within the business of airline, particularly after September 11 event that took place, they still have been able to sustain and continuously grow. Their profitabilities have stayed at the same level without really being damaged. When other companies were or other airlines were in a mess, they tried to or they continue to achieve that goal. In very simple terms, without going into the details, because those details will be available to you in the notes as well as on the PowerPoints, even their pilots try and clean the cabin. So they have very limited number of flying operators inside the plane. The people, they do not have any conveyor belts where you can load your luggage. They do not allow you to carry luggage for overnight stays. All these is targeted towards one frame, and that is to provide traveling for the busy people who can go to a place and return over the night or stay one night and come back. So they do not entertain people who most probably would like to go for longer period of stay with heavy luggage. Now, keeping this in mind, even their aircrafts are the same, which actually reduces their economies of operations in the sense that if you have the same aircraft, you are more specialized in maintenance. You do not have to worry about different kind of replaceable parts. You have the same systems operating. All people are aware of those systems, so there is economies of scale. So that is why they are continuously able to maintain low price. Now, the logic is that other aircrafts have tried the same thing. In America, there were aircrafts or there were airlines which tried that, but they failed. However, a similar system has been adopted in the European center, where we find that there are airlines which are providing cheap services from UK to the European continent for very low prices. Again, these replicas are there, but they are sitting in two different contexts. One is internationally flying, obviously from United Kingdom to the European continent like France and Germany, where Southwest Airlines operates only in UK, and they have established such a strong market that nobody has dared enter their business area. The other company which may be of interest to you, and you can search it on the internet, is Zara Textiles. Okay, Zara Textiles is actually a boutique designer firm which provides the latest clothes for the youth, the young and the what we call the chic segment of the market, young people who are interested in the latest fashion designs but do not have to pay heavy monies. Now, again, Zara has been growing for over 15% over the last 10 years in all kinds of times. And how they have been able to do that? Because they have a very specific linking system of all their activities, starting from finding the designs for the clothes, designing them themselves, then making them in their own factory-owned locations, then supplying them to the retails and the retail shops are located on high streets, and high streets in the Western language is called the place where top grade outlets are located, where more fashionable people come along, and their designs are changed every month. That means that they are so fast in trying to, from the designing stage to the production and putting it into the company's or retail outlets, they are so good that they can do that within 15 days time frame. Now, if you compare this company with the other boutiques like Gucci and so on and so forth, where the boutiques are designing and producing every season, which means after every 3 months or every 4 months, they are able to bring in new designer lines. Zara is continuously doing it every month. And all that they have done is that they have tried to integrate all their activities, all their capabilities in such a form that that is what has created a competitive advantage in the market. A very simple example is that they do not allow inventories to build in any of their locations, which basically means is that they do not produce in large numbers. What they do is that they produce in smaller numbers, and all their customers are aware of this fact that within 15 days, if they do not buy now, they will lose out altogether on the design. And how they've been able to do is that their designers are located everywhere. They have got a very strong information technology system backing up this whole thing, where designs flow in from all over the world to their central locations where final designs are taken, decisions are taken. The designs are moved to the factory locations, their own factory areas, where rapidly these designs are converted into, with the latest technology machines, into the fashion or the clothes that are required, which are fashionable, and the shipment takes place. Another example to give you this logic of how fast they move is that their clothes are always hangered. That means वो हमेशा हैंगरों पे लग के पहुंचते हैं दुकानों में, और straight from the trucks वो जो जहां क्या नाम है लोकेट किए जाते हैं रैक्स के ऊपर, वहां उनको खोलने की जरूरत नहीं पड़ती. दे आर नॉट पैकेज्ड इन सेलोफीन बैग्स जहां खोल के उनको निकाल के उनको इस्त्री करके लगाया जाए. वो सीधा क्या नाम है दुकानों के ऊपर रैक्स के ऊपर डायरेक्टली हैंगर्स के ऊपर लटके हुए पहुंच जाते हैं. ये जो चीज़ मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ, द पॉइंट दैट आई एम मेकिंग हियर इज कि ये जो कंपैटिटिव एडवांटेज उन्होंने क्रिएट कर दिया मार्केट में, एंड पीपल आर बाइंग सो मच सो दैट 15 दिन 20 दिन के अंदर अंदर उनकी सारी इन्वेंट्री दुकानों में से खत्म हो जाती है, विच मीन्स दैट द कस्टमर्स लाइक और मे बी लव देयर वे ऑफ डूइंग थिंग्स and bringing new technologies or new fashion to them in a very rapid session. So people can continuously upgrade their wardrobe rather than wait for a whole season and try and find customized products which are of very heavy price, obviously very heavy cost to the customer as well as for the manufacturer. और इसीलिए उनकी प्राइसेस जो हैं वो मीडियम लेवल पे रखी गई हैं। मकसद ये है कि जो लोग तेज़ी से अपना वार्डरोब को चेंज करना चाहते हैं वो ऑब्वियसली बहुत ज़्यादा पैसा किसी एक टाइम के ऊपर खर्च नहीं करना चाहेंगे, और उनकी ख्वाहिश यही होगी कि उसी कीमत में जो वो अगर किसी बड़े बुटीक से चीज़ खरीदें तो वो उसी में 3-4 दफ़ा अपना वार्डरोब जो है वो चेंज कर लें, विच इज़ अ वेरी लॉजिकल पॉइंट, which means rapidly bringing in new fashion designs, ensuring that there is no inventory, because जब भी inventory होगी और नया डिज़ाइन मूव करता है तो वो inventory को dispose ऑफ करना पड़ता है। In the rest of the industry, inventory disposal कभी कभी 60% डिस्काउंट पे होता है, जबकि these people never have क्या नाम है discounted selling of their material. They do not sell anything on discount because discount तक पहुंचने की नौबत ही नहीं आती है, and the whole inventory is sold off. Now this has created a competitive advantage, मगर कोई भी शख्स ये सोचने की कोशिश करे कि कौन सा ऐसा फैक्टर है जो इसमें कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहा है सॉलिडली, तो वो बहुत मुश्किल हो जाएगा. वी विल बी वेरी डिफिकल्ट, इट विल बी वेरी वेरी डिफिकल्ट फॉर अस टू बी एबल टू डिटरमिन कि व्हाट इज दैट सिंगल सोर्स दैट रेस्ट्स इन द सिस्टम, जिसको हम कह सकते हैं कि ये इन्होंने इसके बेस पे कंपेटिटिव एडवांटेज क्रिएट किया हुआ है और उसको वो सस्टेन भी कर रहे हैं. So what we are concluding here is two things, that there have to be strategic resources, और इनके हवाले से strategic resources क्या हैं? They have a very good quality designing team, they have very good quality high technology production systems, they have very effective inventory management which is through the information system flow, and their shops are located what we call on the high streets. Now, having given you these 4 points, but you have to understand that each one of them is individually located. Now, any single one cannot create that competitive advantage that Zara has. What Zara has is the logic of capabilities which integrate all these points. This integration of all these points become one of the most critical frames of what we distinguish between a strategic resource and a distinctive capability or capabilities. And we can also understand from this logic that the more capabilities that we can demonstrate in the market, the better would be our ability to be able to sustain the competitive advantage that we have been discussing till now. What we have understood up till now is that this is the integration of all the abilities, capabilities, and the strategic resources which are available inside the company. एक चीज तो क्लियर हो गई कि ये जितना भी रिसोर्स बेस्ड व्यू है ये इंटरनली फोकस्ड है, और इंटरनल फोकस होने की वजह से हमारी थोड़ी सी समझने में वी नीड टू बी वेरी क्लियर कि जब हम इंटरनल सोर्सेज को चेक करते हैं तो फिर हमने ये भी कहा था कि इन इंटरनल सोर्सेज को हमने एक्सटर्नल एनवायरनमेंट से मैच करने की कोशिश करनी है. तो इसका मतलब ये हुआ कि अगर हमें ये एनालिसिस करनी पड़े एज स्ट्रैटेजिस्ट एंड एज स्ट्रैटेजिक मार्केटर्स, तो व्हाट वी विल बी डूइंग इज वी विल बी एक्चुअली लुकिंग एट आवर इंटरनल सोर्सेज, find each strategic resource that we believe it is there, and then try and locate that strategic resource का जो link है in market में वो कहाँ बैठता है. Now, मैंने आपसे पहले भी कहा था कि there are two things that we are looking at is, one is the internal resources and the other is the key success factor which is located in the market. Now, key success factors को we will be discussing at a subsequent time frame, but at this point we need to understand that these capabilities is not an individual, it's not a particular machine, technology, or any one thing, it's a complex set of behaviors and activities. यहीं हम जिस चीज़ से हमने एक बात शुरू की थी कि हमने कहा था इकोनॉमिक्स में जो फैक्टर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन थे वो थे जिनकी वजह से फर्म्स यूज टू अचीव डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ परफॉर्मेंस आउटकम्स. नाउ उसी को बेस बनाते हुए अगर हम आज के लिटरेचर की तरफ देखते हैं तो यू विल बी सीइंग मेनी फंक्शनल एरियाज और मेनी एक्टिविटी फ्रेम्स all claiming that we are the source of competitive advantage. Simple एक चीज अगर मैं ले लूं तो supply chain people will come and say that supply chain management is actually the source of competitive advantage. On the other side, अगर आप HR की तरफ जाते हैं, human resource की तरफ से, तो हर जगह पे ये claim आता है कि the human resource is actually the source of the competitive advantage of the firm. Therefore, human resource management is the critical point. Whereas on the other side of the picture, marketing को हम लेते हैं as the point where the source of competitive advantage rests. Like I told you, market orientation is one of the concepts which is applied in this logic. On the other side, Michael Porter और उनके साथी जो हैं, they have been trying to promote कि strategies जो हैं या strategic orientations जो हैं, वो actually create करती हैं market में जो sustainable competitive advantage है. इससे पेश करके I go into this discussion, but एक चीज़ we need to be very clear कि ये internal और external का link जो है, जब तक ये नहीं बैठता fit, तो strategic competitive advantage जो sustainable है वो हो नहीं सकता. तो ये किसी एक चीज़ पे मबनी नहीं है. अगर कोई assume कर रहा है कि human resource management is the source, unless and until it can be applied in terms of the market requirements, this source is of no use. Let's take an example. Within the logic and within the discussion of strategic human resource management, वहाँ knowledge management is one of the criteria that is being assumed to be the source of competitive advantage. और वहाँ जब हम discussion करते हैं, तो normally we come about to talk about tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge. Now, which one of the two is the source of competitive advantage is a question that comes to the mind. Tacit knowledge is the knowledge that rests in one single individual, whereas explicit knowledge is the one that is shared across everybody throughout the organization. अब अगर हम सिर्फ इन दो points को लें, तो logic जो हमने competitive advantage के लिए कहा था कि competitive advantage का जो source है, that has to be unique, that has to be non-transferable, that cannot be copied, it cannot be bought or sold in the market. लेकिन अगर हम explicit knowledge को लेते हैं, तो वो knowledge ऐसी है जो एक कंपनी से दूसरी कंपनी में ट्रांसफर हो जाएगी, बिकॉज जिन लोगों के पास ये नॉलेज है, अगर उनको आप उठा के ले जाएं, तो लॉजिक कहती है कि जो नॉलेज है वो दूसरे के पास भी वही चली गई. तो इफ दैट नॉलेज इज गॉन, सो जो बेसिक कॉन्सेप्ट है इसका रिसोर्स बेस्ड व्यू का, वो निगेट हो जाता है, एंड देयरफॉर सस्टेनेबल कंपैटिबल एडवांटेज जो है वो खत्म हो जाती. इसलिए बार्ने एंड वर्नर फेल्ट ने ये एक पॉइंट दिया था जो कि याद रखने का है कि ये जो है आपका जो रिसोर्सेज होते हैं, उनके अंदर 4 क्वालिटीज होनी चाहिए. स्ट्रैटेजिक रिसोर्सेज होते हैं. एक तो मैंने आपको बताया था स्ट्रैटेजिक क्यों होते हैं. दैट इज दैट दे शुड हैव लॉन्ग टर्म इम्प्लीकेशंस, दे रिक्वायर funding of both time and money investments, and these investments become irreversible during the short period of time. अगर ये बात ठीक है, तो फिर लॉजिक कहता है कि the sources, strategic sources must have few other concepts behind it. उसमें 4 हैं और उनको हम VRIO के कॉन्सेप्ट से हम उसको रिकग्नाइज करते हैं. V stands from value. उसका मतलब है कि वो रिसोर्स जो है वो वैल्यू क्रिएट कर सके मार्केट में, उसकी कोई कैपेबिलिटी हो या उसकी कोई आइडेंटिटी हो जिसकी मदद से वो वैल्यू मार्केट में क्रिएट कर सके, जिसके ऊपर अब काफ़ी हम डिस्कशन कर चुके हैं. वी हैव आल्सो बीन एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड कि ये कब और कैसे होगा. सेकेंड, द पॉइंट इज आर. VRIO है, तो आर का मतलब है रेयर है. रेयर का मतलब ये हुआ कि ये जो कैपेबिलिटी है या ये जो रिसोर्स है, ये हर एक को हर जगह पे नहीं मिल सकती. It is very unique in terms of its availability, और कुछ कंपनियों के पास ये availability होगी, कुछ के पास नहीं होगी. The third point, I, it is inimitable. Inimitable का मतलब ये हुआ कि ये कॉपी नहीं किया जा सकता. ठीक है, इसको हम किसी भी जगह पे चले जाएं तो उसके अंदर हम उसको कॉपी नहीं कर सकते, यानी एक से दूसरा कॉपी नहीं कर सकता. और मैंने एग्जांपल दी, जैसे साउथ वेस्ट एयरलाइंस हैं, उनके जो बिहेवियर्स और प्रोसेसेस और सिस्टम्स हैं, दूसरी एयरलाइन उसी लेवल से उसी पॉइंट पे कॉपी नहीं कर सकती. कुछ चीज़ें ऐसी हैं विद इन द साउथ वेस्ट एयरलाइन जिनको हम बेंचमार्क कर लेते हैं, और बेंचमार्क के पॉइंट्स को हम कोशिश करते हैं अचीव करने की, but how do we do it? What processes would be applied to achieve that benchmark of effectiveness, वो हमें नहीं मालूम. हो सकता है एक कंपनी उसको दूसरी तरफ से कर रही हो, the other company might be trying to do it differently, but this difference is what creates the actual competitive advantage in the market and the differential between the performances between two organizations. The same logic we already expressed in Zara also. We know that Zara can develop a product or a fashion and design it and bring this fashion into the market within 15 days time frame, where other companies do it across 3 to 4 months. अगर कोई कॉपी भी करना शुरू करे तो is it possible that they can copy each and every activity and framework in the same level at the same capability of efficiency? You should be able to understand it becomes very difficult, and that is why monopolistic competition के पीछे logic यही है कि each company uses its own strengths and weaknesses in different configurations to achieve that competitive advantage. Now, I've already talked to you about 3. The 4th is organizational support. Now, without the logic of creating the organizational support behind this strategic resource, nothing will happen. So the important factors, as I was discussing with you about the knowledge management systems के अंदर कि अगर explicit knowledge है वो market से बाहर चला जाए दूसरी company के पास तो क्या होगा, वो तो copy हो गया. अगर वो कॉपी हो गया तो फिर क्या जो पुरानी कंपनी थी उसके पास वो एडवांटेज खत्म हो गया. Now these are the questions that require your investigative mind to think about. Now I will try and draw for you the logic of the activities that most probably sit behind Zara's capabilities or Zara's sustainable competitive advantage, and you look at it from these 4 points. Number 1, that these capabilities, like I said, V, value, R, rare, I, inimitable, and O, organizational support is required. Now, if we talk about Zara, Zara had 3 points of strategies, and I will mark them as A, B, and C. Their 3 points of strategy was, number 1, immediate fashion. Number 2, their target market was youth, chic youth. Chic youth means people who are fashionable, are very interested in the latest fashions, are not very rich. They do not have to wait for time. They want to keep changing their wardrobes. They are more into parties and so on and so forth. That and their production system. So number 1 is their product, which is rapid fashion. Number 2 is their market, which is the chic segment. Again, 3rd is their production systems. Now, all of these are supposed to be linked. Now, how do they link it up? Now, think about it that the product requires, let's say, designing. So we have design as one of the critical points of activity that they need to have. Now, this design has to be supported by the information system. So if you put information system here, it is supporting the production point. It is also supporting the design point, and these two are supporting the product that is going to be developed. Now, on the other side of the picture, to target this chic market, they have to locate themselves in sophisticated outlets which are located on the high streets. Okay? Now, high street plus they need to ensure that this product does not stay for long in their outlets. So their inventory management system is critical to attract these two. Okay? But at the back of these two, again, that is the high street markets and inventory system, they need information technology again. So information technology is the one which actually supports this frame as well as this frame. Again, think about it that I'm just talking about 2 areas of the system. However, production, like I told you, they need to get the designs very rapidly into the market. Number 2, they also require to produce rapidly from their own production lines and send them to the market, to the high streets. They again need a high level of technology. So they have information technology which allows them to manufacture products in their plants at a very rapid time frames. They're also getting information from the design frames to their central locations where they produce, and then they supply this whole thing to the high streets. Now, if you look at this, their strategic positioning is a fashion design product which is rapidly changing every 15 days. Their production processes which are on the latest machines located within their own company system, and their target market which is specifically youth, not very high priced people. They are interested in medium range, but they want to change their wardrobe regularly. Now behind this, they have certain other factors which will support this whole production process, and with the help of this, they are capable of developing the competitive advantage in the whole system. If any place breaks down in the whole system, the competitive advantage will be lost. Now, this whole thing cannot be transferred to another company by just reading these points. This can be analyzed in any unique capability system that we can framework. However, the problem basically is that such systems cannot be copied. And I've just talked to you that one of the basic concepts of a source which is strategic and which is what we call within the framework of the resource-based view, it is inimitable. It cannot be copied. It is rare. You cannot find the same systems lying everywhere. They need organizational support. So organizational support right from the top to the bottom is trying to fix. Now, this, what I told you, is actually the competitive strategy of the company or the business strategy of the firm, which actually tries to build a comprehensive integration of all functional areas, all activities, various capabilities sitting various areas, and they have to be brought together under the logic of competitive strategies. What now my point that I'm trying to now recapitulate and conclude here is that today we have been discussing one of the sources of competitive advantage which is available in literature. This actually started from Penrose in 1930s, economist who talked about why firms differ in their performance. And remember one thing, that all strategic marketing literature, all strategic management literature, all strategy literature actually tries to focus on this issue, is why do companies differ in their performance? Because it's actually ultimately the logic of performance which runs a company. In that, we have already said that one of the sources, one of the major issues is, and we have tried to link it up with the logic that if you can provide sustainable value in the market compared with another company or your competitor, which is accepted by the market, which is the customer, then you have what we call the competitive advantage. And if we have this competitive advantage, we are very clear that our performance will be on the higher side. And this logic of performance has to be seen from the point that we discussed last time, the willingness to pay a higher price by the customer, because we are trying to create value. So the logic of competitive advantage and sustainability of that competitive advantage, irrespective of where it comes from, is that the market must find value in it. And the value is the value that is created between the price that we charge and the price that the customer is willing to pay. Like I said, we have already discussed that human resource management is considered to be one of the sources of the firm. But is it truly the source? Or is it the way that that source is going to be leveraged? Just to clear this logic, suppose a company owns or company hires Muhammad Ali the boxer. Now, if he is brought into position in a company which is actually selling, let's say, paper, let's say printing paper and paper board and so on and so forth, and this person is available in the company, can we really say that this person has created a competitive advantage in the market by his mere presence? Obviously, he has his capabilities, he has his own unique strengths. Unless the company is capable of exploiting that unique strength, there is no way that a value will be created, even if you hire the most popular brand model or brand ambassador in the world. It will still not be sufficient unless and until the whole system backs up the logic of what you are capable of creating in the market. And I said that for this purpose, there are three major areas or three major authors which may be read to be able to understand these logics. The first one is Werner and obviously Barney. Then we have Day, who has talked about it. And then we will be discussing in this next session the concept we call the distinct competence of a company. This we will discuss in light of the area what we call the TEECE, T-E-E-C-E. Another author, TEECE, and his colleagues actually try to explain that what is, in their opinion, a static concept, which is resources or strategic resources. They try to build this logic of dynamic capability, which means that these capabilities need to continuously be upgraded. So, in my opinion, these four major authors should be read to be able to understand the logic of the whole framework. Like I told you, Wernerfeld, Barney, Day, and then TEECE et al., which means TEECE and his colleagues, who actually try to further this discussion of the resource-based view. Now, to recapitulate, what I've been saying is that the competitive advantage that is created in the market is different from the source of that competitive advantage, which rests in the company. Now, this source in the company is what we also call the strategic resource, and we have created this concept that sources are many, but those which are critical for creating the competitive advantage are the strategic resource, and those are the ones which have the logic of they create value, they are rare, they are inimitable, that means they cannot be copied, and they find organizational support behind them. Now, even then, the logic does not stop there, because we are considering the concept of sustainability of the competitive advantage, which has been provided to us by TEECE and his colleagues, who actually tried to explain the logic of dynamic capabilities, which means that as the environments change, as the requirements of the market change, the capability and the configuration of these capabilities, the way they are going to be put together, the way new thinking processes will be brought into position, the way new knowledge will be created, and how that knowledge will be leveraged in the market will become the critical point on which we will be able to sustain this competitive advantage. And like I said, there are a number of designed functional areas which consider themselves to be the true source of competitive advantage, or sometimes they are considered to be one of the sources. That means there are a number of sources, but one of them can be considered as what they are purporting or they are promoting for themselves. Supply chain management, knowledge management, human resource management have all come into position for the basic concept that each one is thinking of that their own area is what creates the competitive advantage. However, the logic is not that. The logic is of the business strategy. How all these areas that we have been discussing collectively pull together to create that advantage that the market desires, and the way the market will respond to that. And in the final analysis, it is the customer who actually decides whether there is value that has been created. Now, like I said, in the beginning of the next session, a short period we will spend on the dynamic capability concept, and then we will take up the logic of the supply chain management, the value chain analysis, or the value chain, which is Michael Porter's conceptualization of where you can and how you can locate your competitive advantage. Thank you.